So the big cover story in the New York Times today is that the Times called officials in every state and they didn't find any evidence of voter fraud. Well, I guess that does it. I guess there's nothing more to see here. Joe Biden is president-elect. We can all move on with our lives, except that that's not actually the end of the story. You see, I think that one of the things that all of the different conversations that are going on, whether it be in the mainstream media or on social media, around all the different irregularities that people are seeing and asserting, is that it's not actually being talked about what the Trump campaign is actually arguing, which is not what the New York Times is portraying in this article. Now, before we go too far into it, because I know that YouTube has been on an epic banning spree lately of anyone who dares to talk about this subject, I want to make my position very, 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 very clear. And I've said this from the absolute beginning. What my position is I hope personally that Donald Trump does end up winning a second term out of this. But if he doesn't, if he can't make his case in court, then, we're all going to have to deal with a Joe Biden presidency, and it is what it is. What I personally want to see happen shouldn't have any impact at all on what the courts decide. And frankly, what you personally want to see happen shouldn't have any impact on it at all as well. So my position on this is I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how widespread it is. I've been keeping abreast of things. I've been keeping an eye on what people are saying is going on. But ultimately, we need to allow the courts to decide what is going on and what to do about it. That is the role of the courts. And so I'm not going on either side on this. I think it is very likely that Joe Biden could wind up as our next president. I think it is very likely that Donald Trump could wind up as our next president. I just think that there's actually been no decision made yet. The electors have not certified the election. Nothing has actually happened to say who the next president is going to be. And we all need to be patient and allow the process to play out. But speaking of the process, I do think that it is very, very important that we actually understand what is being argued. And this is not something that is really being covered in any nuanced detail out there. So I spent a little bit of time trying to understand it, and I found this article from National Review that is specific to what is going on with the Trump campaign's filings in the state of Pennsylvania, which looks like it's going to be like the linchpin of this whole thing. If Trump can flip Pennsylvania, then he's going to win. If he can't, then Biden's going to win. I mean, there are other factors involved too. There are actually other routes that Trump can take in terms of flipping additional states outside of Pennsylvania. I'm not going to get into that today because I really just want to understand what their argument is in the state of Pennsylvania. And before the YouTube overlords come crashing down on me, I want to say I'm presenting the argument. I am not taking a side. I am not asserting any which way from Sunday. People should read a variety of information and figure out where they fall on this themselves. But in order to really develop an educated and informed opinion, we have to understand what's going on amongst all of the bickering and the shouting and the back and forth. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a look at this article, and I'm going to explain why I think Trump actually has a pretty good case in Pennsylvania. In my layperson's opinion, I ain't a lawyer, but I'm going to explain all that, and then you can make up your mind on your own. But before we get into that, folks, I need to do my quick plug. I do daily content around news, politics, culture, really anything I feel like talking about. If you enjoy the content that I put out there, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel. The reality is this: for the last several weeks, YouTube has been slowly but surely cordoning off my content to people who are only subscribed to this channel. I'm not the only person experiencing that. I'm not the only YouTuber experiencing that. It's happening to a lot of different people. So if you want to continue to support the work I'm doing, hit that little red subscribe button down below. If you think you're subscribed, just go ahead and give it a double check for me. And if you want to turn on the notifications, share this video out to your friends and family, give it a thumbs up, all the better. I really appreciate it. All right, let's take a look at this National Review article. Trump campaign files lawsuit on Pennsylvania election, but does it have a case? The Trump campaign has filed a lengthy complaint in federal court challenging the Pennsylvania's administration of the 2020 presidential election as a violation of the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. This is the theory under which 20 years ago, the Supreme Court invalidated Florida's presidential election vote counting procedures in Bush v. Gore. The main target of this suit is 682,479,000 mail-in ballots and absentee ballots submitted from Democratic strongholds of Philadelphia and Allegheny counties. The latter includes Pittsburgh. According to the current reported returns, presumptive President-elect Biden defeated President Trump in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania by about 46,000 votes. I think I saw somewhere online today that lead has increased to over 50,000 now, but when we're talking about a total pool of 682,000, that's really not that much in the grand scheme of things. All right, I'm going to skip down a little bit, and I'm going to link this article in the description below if you want to go and read it for yourself and get the full breadth of it. The campaign alleges that state election officials and courts established de facto an illegal two-tiered voting system. In part, this is because the differences in treatment for in-person and mail-in voting. So that is different than what we're seeing a lot of the media argue in terms of, dead people voting and, fraudulent ballots. What the Trump campaign is actually arguing is much different than that. What they're saying is that the state of Pennsylvania is treating mail-in ballots differently than ballots cast in person. That is the crux of the case. And what they're saying is that under the Constitution, that is not allowed. We need to treat all of the ballots equally. That is not the same thing as what is being covered in the media. It is simply not, at least not in the ones that I've heard. Now, granted, I really do try to avoid a lot of mainstream media like the plague at this point. So if you've seen them talk about this, please leave a comment below and let me know where you saw it and when you saw it, and I'll go try to look up a video of it. But I haven't seen anyone really talking about this nuanced aspect. This is the charge, is that the state of Pennsylvania treated mail-in votes differently than in-person votes. That is what they are arguing. That is the constitutional question that the courts are going to have to answer. Let's keep going. The complaint alleges that in-person voters were subjected to rigorous signature matching, B, voted in a polling place monitored pursuant to statute by poll observers from both parties, and C, had their votes counted in a transparent and verifiable, open and observed manner. By contrast, the Trump campaign asserts that the Secretary of State, who is a Democrat, affirmatively excised nearly every element of transparency and verifiability for the nearly 2.65 million mail-in votes cast. And we're going to keep going a little bit down in the article. And again, please read the full thing if you have the interest. I'm just not going to read the full thing in a video. That would be boring as hell. For the most part, these claims, this is where it gets really interesting in terms of the constitutional argument that the Trump campaign is making. Hold on to your hats. For the most part, these claims merge into the contention that the state gave Democratic voters unfair advantages and then adopted a process designed to conceal and cement these advantages. So what they're asserting is that Democrats were more likely to vote by mail-in ballot, and if the state of Pennsylvania treated those mail-in ballots differently from in-person ballots, that inherently gave the people voting by mail-in ballot an unfair advantage. That brings Bush v. Gore into play. In that famous 2000 election case, the Supreme Court called a halt to the recount process ordered by the state Supreme Court in Florida. A 5-4 majority found that the state court's rulings, as they were being executed by the counties in question, had resulted in widely disparate treatment of voters during the canvassing of ballots across counties, and sometimes even within the same county. The court reasoned that disparate treatment that had the effect of canceling or diluting the votes of some voters, or that privileges some voters and not others, is unconstitutional. That's the argument the Trump campaign is making, folks. That's the argument that they're making. Listen, the state of Pennsylvania, they're walking a fine line in this. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that some of the counties in Pennsylvania are blatantly breaking Pennsylvania's own election law. The courts are going to have to decide on that. But the argument that the Trump campaign is making is not necessarily that. It has nothing to do with dead voters or secret ballots or any of these things. It is saying that in treating the two ballots differently, the state of Pennsylvania violated the Constitution based on precedent set by Bush v. Gore. The majority faulted the state for capriciously failing to apply uniform standards in the canvassing of ballots. It further observed that the state's on-the-fly process, if allowed to continue in the dubious quest to determine the intent of some voters, would prevent the state from certifying its results by the date mandated by federal law, thereby disenfranchising millions of voters. They go on to say that, I agree with the commentators who believe the sounder position was outlined in the concurrence of the late Chief Justice William Rehnquist, joined by Justices Clarence Thomas and the late Antonin Scalia. Well, they joined Justices Anthony Kennedy and Sandra Day O'Connor in the majority equal protection analysis. They explained that the principal problem was that the state court's rulings had overridden the election laws enacted by the state legislature. And that is the same thing that's going on in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court overruled laws that were enacted by the Pennsylvania state legislature. So again, we've got something else that is mirrored in Bush v. Gore that the Trump campaign is arguing. It is the state's legislature, not its judiciary, that is constitutionally empowered to set the rules by which electors are appointed in presidential elections. Moving on, in deciding Bush v. Gore, the court recognized the danger that its equal protection analysis was potentially so expansive that it could invoke regarding any treatment that was arguably disparate, even if such differences were justifiable or trivial. Consequently, the majority stressed that our consideration is limited to the present circumstances, for the problem of equal protection in election processes generally presents many complexities. So the court in Bush v. Gore said this decision is limited to this specific circumstance. So another question it seems as though the court is going to have to contend with is this circumstance too dissimilar to what happened in Bush v. Gore for this decision to apply, or are we essentially talking about the same flippin' thing? And that, again, is for the courts to decide. But here is why I've got two reasons why I think that it looks like Trump actually could get the W on this one. Here is the first one. If there is convincing evidence that the Trump's campaign's factual claims are true, and we must note that state officials vigorously dispute them. YouTube, I'm presenting both sides here. State officials don't agree with Trump. Let's acknowledge that. The courts, beginning with the judge in question that's deciding this case, will have to sort out whether the disparities at issue meet the Bush v. Gore test of actionable equal protection violations. And particularly when it comes to the Pennsylvania court's countermanding of the state legislature's election day deadline for receiving ballots, the Trump campaign is also relying on the principles explicated in Chief Justice Rehnquist's Bush v. Gore concurrence. So that just backs up what I just said. If the Supreme Court, and I do believe this will go to the Supreme Court, by the way. I don't think this is going to get decided in a lower court. I think it's a waste of time to even consider it, but this is the process they have to go through. This is going to go to the Supreme Court, ultimately. So the Supreme Court is going to have to question whether or not this ruling that they issued in Bush v. Gore also applies to this particular case. Now, here's reason number 2 that I think that Trump has a really fair shot. 3 Supreme Court justices were on the Bush legal team from the 2000 election. There are 3 sitting justices on the Supreme Court that literally argued in favor of the Bush side in Bush v. Gore. This is from the Gateway Pundit. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit so we get to the good stuff. Bush assembled a top-notch team of attorneys, and through a variety of different legal maneuvers involving courts and recounts, he had eventually solidified his victory. 3 attorneys from that team? Well, they just happened to be Chief Supreme Court Justice John Roberts and his 2 newest colleagues, Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. Also, two of the current sitting justices, Clarence Thomas and Stephen Breyer, were also on the highest court at the time and predictably had different opinions on the issue, with Breyer taking Gore's side and Thomas taking Bush's side. For good measure, Justice Neil Gorsuch also had ties to that era, as W had nominated him to serve on the 10th Circuit in 2006. So Trump knows. And listen, I don't actually think that Roberts would probably decide in Trump's favor on this one, because Roberts hates Trump and Robert has actually gotten way more liberal under Trump. But here is the reality. We have Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, who are conservative and will probably decide in favor of Trump. We have Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and ACB, who are all nominated by Trump. Guess what that equals? That equals 5. I think that Trump has a really good shot at this one. And I don't know. I just think it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out. I frankly would be, like I said, I personally want Trump to win a second term, but I've gone back and forth mentally about whether or not I actually think this is a good idea, because I think that, guys, the left is going to melt down if Trump wins this. They're going to riot. It's going to be months and months and months of civil unrest, maybe even longer than that. Trump's probably going to have to invoke the Insurrection Act. Like, I almost wonder, and again, my personal feelings, but I do almost wonder, would it be better for the country just to let this ride? I don't know the answer to that, and frankly, it's not my job to figure it out. This is now in the hands of the courts. They're going to be the ones that decide this issue, and my greatest hope in this situation is that they just follow the Constitution. They apply the Constitution in a way that is principled and ethical, regardless, honestly, of whose side they're on. I think that that's actually the most important thing at issue in cases like this, is just that we go back and we follow the Constitution the way it's laid out. But frankly, based on Bush v. Gore, based on my very layperson's understanding of this case, I think Trump's got a good shot at it. So buckle up, folks. It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. All right, that's all I've got for this video. I'll see you guys soon.